Before the sun rose on the 25th of October 2004, the people of Tak Bai, an overwhelmingly Muslim district in Thailand's far south, were already surrounded by fear. The southern border provinces of Thailand had long been plagued by mistrust, tension, and violence. For years, the Malay Muslim minority in Narathiwat, Yala, and Pattani provinces had lived under deep suspicion from the Thai state, treated as outsiders in their own homeland. They spoke a different language, practiced a different religion, and held grievances that had been ignored for generations. That morning, a protest had begun, peaceful, defiant, and filled with desperation. Families, friends, and neighbors gathered outside the Tak Bai police station, demanding the release of 6 men detained on questionable charges. These were not militants. They were sons, brothers, and fathers accused of aiding an insurgency. But without trial, without transparency, without justice, hundreds of people came to voice their demand: let them go. But what followed was not negotiation. It was not understanding. It was a message delivered in bullets, fists, and boots. The Thai state responded to this peaceful protest not with dialogue but with force. By the end of the day, 85 people would be dead, not from gunfire, not from explosions, but from suffocation, stacked, bound, and crushed in the back of military trucks. This was not just a tragedy, it was a warning, and it was one the world almost forgot. This is the story of the Tak Bai Massacre day, when justice died under the weight of silence, and accountability was buried beneath layers of official lies. Part 1. A powder keg ignited. The southern provinces of Narathiwat, Yala, and Pattani had never fully reconciled with Thai rule. Formerly part of the Pattani Sultanate, a centuries-old Malay Muslim kingdom, they were annexed into Siam in the early 20th century under King Rama V. The central government's campaign to forcibly assimilate the region by outlawing the Malay language in schools, pushing Buddhist nationalism, and ignoring local grievances created a slow-burning resentment that never truly disappeared. By the early 2000s, tensions had returned with a vengeance. A simmering insurgency, driven by local discontent and fueled by state repression, had begun to spread. Security forces and separatist groups were now locked in a deadly dance of violence and reprisal. But most ordinary Muslims in the south were not fighters. They were victims caught between insurgent attacks and military crackdowns, blamed for terrorism they did not commit, and treated with suspicion simply because of their religion. In this environment, it took little to spark a fire. On the 23rd of October 2004, a few days before the massacre, a group of Muslim men were arrested in Tak Bai, accused of giving weapons to insurgents. Their families, convinced the charges were fabricated or exaggerated, organized a protest outside the Tak Bai police station. It began small, around 100 people, but word spread quickly. By the morning of the 25th of October, the crowd had grown to over 1,500. It was one of the largest demonstrations in the region's recent memory. Protesters carried no weapons. They held banners, chanted, and demanded that their relatives be released. Police stood in formation behind barbed wire barricades. Military reinforcements were called in. Helicopters hovered above. The state was preparing not for dialogue but for suppression. At 10 a.m., the order came. Police began firing water cannons and tear gas. Rubber bullets followed. Protesters panicked, some running, some throwing stones. Chaos erupted. Security forces advanced. Soldiers beat unarmed civilians with batons. Some protesters were shot. The violence escalated rapidly. Dozens were tackled to the ground, bound behind their backs, and dragged to waiting trucks. Then came the moment that turned brutality into massacre. Captured protesters were forced to lie face down, stacked like logs, 5 to 6 people high inside military trucks. They were not allowed to move. They were not given water. They were not warned. For hours, the trucks drove to a military camp in Pattani province. The men inside screamed. They begged. Some fainted. Others vomited. The ones on the bottom slowly suffocated, crushed under the weight of bodies above them. By the time the trucks reached their destination, at least 78 people had died from suffocation or organ failure. Another 7 had already been killed during the protest crackdown. The death toll stood at 85, all unarmed Muslim civilians. The youngest was just 14. What followed was not accountability, it was cover-up. Thai authorities tried to claim that the deaths were accidental. Officials said the detainees had panicked, causing their own injuries. No one took responsibility for the manner in which the prisoners were transported. Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra dismissed the incident as a tragedy caused by protesters themselves. Incredibly, he said, they died because they were weak. The images of limp bodies, lifeless faces pressed against the metal floor of trucks, and grieving mothers were hidden from national television. The narrative was carefully managed. Most mainstream Thai media echoed the government's explanation. In Bangkok, the incident was barely discussed. In the south, rage exploded. The massacre became a rallying cry. Rather than weakening the insurgency, it radicalized it. Local resentment deepened. New recruits joined rebel groups, not out of ideology, but out of vengeance. Trust between the Malay Muslim population and the Thai state was shattered, perhaps irreparably. International human rights organizations condemned the killings. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the United Nations all demanded investigations. None were truly conducted. Years later, in 2009, a Thai court ruled that the deaths were not caused by intentional acts. No military officers were charged. No police commanders were held accountable. The families of the victims were offered financial compensation, but no justice. Even today, the names of the perpetrators remain hidden. The soldiers who loaded those trucks, the officers who gave the orders, and the officials who buried the truth walk free. Some were even promoted. The Tak Bai massacre is not an isolated incident. It is part of a long pattern of violence in Thailand's southern border provinces, a pattern where security forces are rarely punished, and Muslim lives are treated as expendable. It is also a reflection of the dangerous impunity that exists within Thai institutions. From the 1976 Thammasat University massacre to the Tak Bai killings, the story is often the same. When the state kills, no one is held accountable. The pain remains, but justice is denied. And yet, the memory of Tak Bai survives. In local mosques and family homes, the victims are remembered as martyrs. In southern villages, the anniversary of the massacre is marked with silent prayers, protest songs, and quiet defiance. The state may have silenced the truth, but the people have not forgotten. The Tak Bai massacre is more than a chapter in history. It is a living wound, one that still aches with every unpunished crime, with every denial of responsibility, with every official lie. It is a reminder that peace cannot be built on silence, and that justice delayed is not justice at all. Part 2. The machinery of impunity. After the massacre, the military's first response was not apology, it was silence. In the days following the deaths, government officials were quick to close ranks. There was no independent inquiry, no suspension of commanders, and no transparent fact-finding process. Instead, the narrative pushed to the public was one of unfortunate consequence, not criminal responsibility. Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra doubled down, insisting that the security forces had done their best under difficult conditions. At a press conference, he said, "The situation was tense. If they hadn't responded this way, there could have been greater chaos." To grieving families, this was a slap in the face. It was not just that their sons, brothers, and husbands had died. It was that the government was telling them those deaths were justified. Instead of asking why detainees were piled in trucks, why they were restrained until they suffocated, or who gave the orders, authorities focused on blaming the protesters. Deputy Prime Minister Shavalat Yongchiad, a former army chief, called the protest a provocation orchestrated by insurgents. Military spokesmen repeated that the detainees had collapsed from exhaustion or illness, not violence or negligence. In official reports, the words suffocation and asphyxiation were buried deep beneath euphemisms like transport complications and fatal fatigue. The deaths were transformed into an unfortunate footnote, not an outrage. But those closest to the incident refused to accept the lies. Muslim community leaders in Narathiawat immediately demanded justice. Religious figures condemned the killings in Friday's sermons. Local human rights groups published testimonies from survivors, men who had been crammed into the trucks, who watched others beg for breath, who heard screaming stop as the bodies beneath them went limp. One survivor said, "I felt my ribs cracking. The boy below me was only 15. He stopped moving after 1 hour." These voices, however, were largely ignored by Thai mainstream media, which downplayed the event or focused on supposed insurgent threats instead. The lack of justice in the aftermath of Tak Bai cannot be separated from Thailand's larger history of impunity. In 1976, dozens of student protesters were murdered at Thammasat University by right-wing mobs and police. No one was prosecuted. In 1992, soldiers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators during the Black May protests. No generals went to jail. The pattern was clear. When the Thai state kills its own people, especially the marginalized, it rarely pays a price. In Tak Bai, this trend repeated itself with chilling precision. In 2005, 1 year after the massacre, the National Reconciliation Commission, a body set up by the Thai government, recommended that security forces receive better training and urged a more sensitive approach in the south. But it stopped short of recommending prosecutions. It framed the massacre as a result of miscommunication and poor planning, not a crime. In 2006, under mounting pressure, the military agreed to pay limited compensation to the victims' families, roughly 100,000 to 500,000 baht per death. For poor rural families, this was not insignificant, but it was not justice. It was hush money. The state offered money instead of trials, silence instead of truth. Worse still, some of the commanders involved in the crackdown were later promoted. Army officers who had overseen the Tak Bai operation went on to hold senior positions in Bangkok. Not only were they shielded, they were rewarded. This sent a clear message to both the public and the military. What happened at Tak Bai was not a mistake, it was a policy. Meanwhile, life in Thailand's deep south became even more dangerous. The massacre radicalized many who had previously stayed away from insurgent movements. Recruitment by underground cells increased sharply. Insurgents began attacking military posts, police stations, and even schools. The violence, once sporadic, became organized. Over the next few years, the region would spiral into one of Asia's deadliest low-intensity conflicts. And while the insurgents committed atrocities of their own, bombings, beheadings, and assassinations, the state's brutality gave them their strongest propaganda tool. Every time the government refused to acknowledge Tak Bai, it played into the hands of the militants. International attention to the massacre was short-lived. Amnesty International issued strong condemnations. Human Rights Watch called for a thorough investigation. The UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions asked for accountability. But the Thai government, confident in its global alliances and its place in the war on terror, knew that condemnation would fade. The United States, a key Thai ally, issued only mild statements. The European Union called for restraint but did not demand justice. No foreign government imposed consequences. Tak Bai was quickly added to the long list of human rights abuses that the international community condemned but did not act upon. Within Thailand, the political climate further shifted. In 2006, a military coup ousted Thaksin Shinawatra. His critics hoped the change in leadership might bring justice for Tak Bai. It did not. The military government had even less interest in revisiting past crimes. If anything, it glorified the military as the savior of the nation. In the years that followed, Thailand would see repeated political turmoil, street protests, crackdowns, and more. But never a serious effort to address state violence in the south. Tak Bai became a symbol of everything broken in Thai democracy: the absence of accountability, the marginalization of minorities, and the normalization of violence. In Bangkok, The massacre was barely mentioned in textbooks. In state media, it was a sensitive topic. In military circles, it was a case study not in ethics, but in operational success. Yet in the South, the memory remained raw. Families who lost their sons continued to gather every year on the 25th of October to honor the dead. They held prayers, lit candles, and told stories of the victims. They shared photos, many of them grainy, printed on aging paper of young men whose only crime was demanding justice. These acts of remembrance were quiet, dignified, and powerful. They were a form of resistance against state-imposed forgetting. In Narathiwat's villages, children grew up hearing about Tak Bai not from schools, but from their elders. They were told how the military came with guns, how their fathers were tied up and taken away, how justice never came. These memories shaped a generation. For many, they were not just stories of the past, they were lessons for the future. The Thai state, instead of healing the wounds of Tak Bai, deepened them. Every refusal to investigate, every lie told by officials, every silence in the media was salt in the wound. The massacre was not just an event, it was a structure of violence, denial, and impunity that continued to operate long after the last truck arrived in Patani with its cargo of corpses. Civil society organizations tried to push back. Thai Lawyers for Human Rights, the Cross-Cultural Foundation, and Muslim-led advocacy groups repeatedly called for the reopening of the case. They submitted petitions, organized forums, and met with international observers, but they were consistently stonewalled. Government officials offered condolences, not indictments. Parliamentarians expressed regret, not resolve. Courts issued rulings, but never justice. In 2009, a Narathiwat provincial court delivered its final blow. It ruled that the 78 deaths were caused by suffocation during transport, but added that no military personnel were at fault. The ruling essentially absolved the entire chain of command. No one was to blame. The victims, in the eyes of the court, had simply died because of circumstance. It was a legal whitewash. By then, Tak Bai had become a case study in international human rights law used in academic papers, NGO briefings, and UN reports as a textbook example of impunity. But in the villages of Narathiwat, it was something more intimate. It was grief. It was betrayal. It was a wound that parents could not explain to their children, except with tears. The Thai government occasionally made gestures. Officials visited Tak Bai during anniversaries. They offered prayers. They talked about reconciliation. But these gestures were symbolic, not structural. They did not address the real demands: name the guilty, hold trials, and change the laws that protect abusers. Instead, the military presence in the south increased. Checkpoints multiplied. Soldiers carried out more raids. Surveillance expanded. The region was treated not as part of the nation, but as a security threat. The contrast was stark. In central Thailand, protests were sometimes tolerated. In Bangkok, demonstrators could chant slogans and wave banners. But in Tak Bai, a protest led to 85 deaths. The double standard was impossible to ignore. It was a reminder that in Thailand, justice is not equal and some lives matter less than others. As the years passed, the names of the victims began to fade from the headlines, but their families never forgot. They continued to ask the same questions. Why were our sons stacked like animals in trucks? Who gave the order? Why has no one answered for their deaths? These are questions the Thai state has never answered. Part 3. A culture of silence. A nation without justice. The years passed, but the pain of Tak Bai remained deeply etched in the hearts of Thailand's southern Muslims. While the blood had long dried and news cycles moved on, the silence surrounding the massacre spoke louder than any gunfire ever could. Governments changed, elections were held, and prime ministers came and went. But the people of the South saw no meaningful shift in how justice was delivered or denied. Official statements were issued expressing regret. Some officers were quietly moved to other posts. Compensation was distributed to families, often framed as gestures of goodwill rather than legal responsibility. But true accountability was completely absent. In fact, far from being punished, some of the figures involved in the operation were rewarded. In 2007, the commander of the 4th Army Region at the time of the massacre was promoted. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a reflection of a deeper system that shields those in uniform, even when their actions lead to mass death. The message from the state was clear: impunity is policy. In 2009, a Thai court concluded that the 78 men who suffocated in army trucks died due to overcrowding, not due to any intentional harm by the military. This ruling turned deliberate cruelty into an unfortunate accident in the eyes of the law. The court found no one criminally liable. The deaths were redefined, not as atrocities, but as logistical mishaps. Families were told there was no one to blame. 85 people had died and not a single person would face justice. Such a ruling was more than a legal technicality. It sent a message to all of Thailand, especially the marginalized in the Deep South. When the state kills, it walks away clean. If the Tak Bai incident was meant to suppress unrest, it had the opposite effect. The massacre created a new generation of disillusioned youth. Many who had once believed in peaceful protest now saw it as a death sentence. They learned that even unarmed men praying in front of a police station could end up dead, forgotten, and legally erased. The conflict in southern Thailand worsened. Insurgent groups became more fragmented and violent. The security forces responded with even more force. From 2004 to the late 2010s, over 7,000 people, Muslim and Buddhist alike, lost their lives in the escalating violence. Villages were caught between militants and military, with civilians often paying the price. Schools were bombed, imams and teachers were assassinated, trust evaporated. The sense of historical injustice, coupled with cultural marginalization and political neglect, only deepened. Yet, amid the daily chaos and bloodshed, Tak Bai remained a scar that refused to heal. In the towns and villages of Narathiwat, Yala, and Patani, the names of the dead were recited during prayers, their faces preserved in faded photographs. Local ceremonies quietly honored their memory, but in Bangkok, they were invisible. National television made no mention of them. School books did not record their names. Politicians avoided the topic. The capital moved on, as if Tak Bai had never happened. When the Aling Suf coup brought General Prayuth Chan-o-cha to power, any remaining space for truth was further diminished. Under military rule, freedom of speech was restricted, and investigations into state crimes were discouraged. Talking too loudly about Tak Bai could earn someone a visit from security forces. Dissent was no longer just unpopular, it was dangerous. And so, a wall of silence grew even taller. Despite the repression, stories continued to circulate in quiet corners. Survivors, though few, sometimes found the strength to speak. One man described being crushed in the middle of the stack of detainees, unable to breathe. He remembered the sounds of men above him gasping, choking, then falling silent. When he awoke at the detention camp, he was surrounded by bodies. No one ever apologized to him. He said, "A part of me died in that truck, and it never came back." These testimonies are rare, not because they don't exist, but because there is no space to tell them. Thailand has never launched a truth commission to investigate the massacre. There is no museum, no national memorial, no official day of remembrance. The state has deliberately erased Tak Bai from the national conscience. Contrast this with how it honors soldiers killed in the insurgency with parades, statues, and streets bearing their names. In Thailand, when the state is the victim, memory is preserved. When the state is the perpetrator, silence prevails. This manipulation of collective memory is not just about forgetfulness, it is about control. The powerful define what is remembered and what is buried. The result is a nation where justice is selective and truth is conditional. International attention, once intense, has faded. Human rights organizations still raise the issue from time to time, but global media has moved on to newer conflicts. Meanwhile, Thailand continues to present itself as a beacon of modernity in Southeast Asia, all while refusing to confront its darkest chapters. The hypocrisy is staggering. A country that promotes tourism, economic growth, and international diplomacy still refuses to prosecute those responsible for stacking men like cargo until they died. The victims of Tak Bai were not killed in combat. They were not terrorists. They were unarmed protesters, men who believed they had a right to assemble, to demand justice, and to live. Their deaths were avoidable. Negotiation was possible. Humane detention was possible. Alternatives existed, but none were taken. Why? Because to the authorities, these men were not citizens to be protected. They were Muslims in a Buddhist majority state. They were seen as threat subversives, troublemakers, outsiders. That perception, deeply rooted in racial, religious, and political prejudices, what led to their deaths. And that perception still lingers today. Young people in the South grow up learning two versions of history. In school, they are taught a sanitized nationalist narrative. At home, they hear about Tak Bai, about men who never came home, about bodies stacked like firewood, about mothers searching hospitals and morgues. This split reality creates a fractured identity. Many Southern Malays feel like second-class citizens caught between the expectations of the Thai state and the memory of a massacre that has never been acknowledged. Yet, in that tension, there is also resistance. Civil society in the South continues to document and remember. Community leaders, artists, and educators quietly keep the truth alive. Murals are painted, songs are written, stories are told in local dialects and prayers. While national media avoids the subject, the local memory endures. It is whispered, it is sung, it is carved into tombstones. It cannot be silenced completely. For justice to come, however, more than memory is needed. The Thai state must publicly recognize the crime. It must open its archives, prosecute the guilty, and compensate families with dignity, not as charity, but as reparation. School books must include the truth. Museums must tell it. The military must be held to account. Until this happens, Thailand will remain a country where state violence is normalized and where victims are blamed or forgotten. And yet, history has shown that silence does not last forever. Memory, even when suppressed, has a way of resurfacing. It lives in the hearts of the wounded. It flows through generations. One day, perhaps, those who control the narrative will lose their grip. One day, perhaps, Thailand will face Tak Bai not with fear, but with courage. The courage to admit, the courage to change. But until that day arrives, we must continue to speak. We must tell the truth, not to inflame, but to heal. We must remember, not out of hatred, but out of duty. The men who died in Tak Bai were not mistakes. They were not numbers. They were sons, brothers, fathers, humans. And what was done to them was not misfortune. It was a massacre, and no massacre should ever be forgotten. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.